Well, Mr. Speaker, could I begin by associating this side of the House with the Chancellor's comments about your leg? We wish it well, Mr. Chancellor. Mr. Speaker, we are waiting with interest to hear the details of the latest U-turn on business rates this afternoon. But if the briefing is to be believed, it will be far too little, too late. The Chancellor simply does not understand the desperate situation so many of our pubs are in. And what many pubs are asking is, why did the Chancellor choose to spend billions more on the benefits bill instead of providing proper, permanent business rate support?
Yeah.
If you have ever wanted to watch a high-stakes poker game where one player is sweating buckets while trying to convince the table that a pair of twos is actually a royal flush, then pull up a chair. We are heading straight into the bear pit of the House of Commons, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, has just endured a session so uncomfortable it made a root canal look like a spa day. We are talking about a total collision between Treasury theory and high street reality. On one side, you have the heavy hitters of the opposition, Rupert Lowe and Mel Stride, armed with the kind of cold, hard statistics that make government ministers want to hide under their green leather benches. On the other, a chancellor clinging to her spreadsheet like a life raft in a hurricane. It was a masterclass in polite British disembowelment, featuring careful deflections, rehearsed talking points, and a growing, gaping chasm between the questions being asked and the answers actually being provided. If you think British politics is just about shouting, wait until you see the devastating power of a calm inquiry, delivered with a side of pure, concentrated sass. Quick favor. If you are loving this breakdown of the Westminster madness, hit that subscribe button right now. Over 92% of our viewers haven't yet. It is free, takes a second, and it means the world to us at the British Report. Thanks if you did. Now, back to the show.
I wrote to the Chancellor on the 8th of January with the support of 7,000 businesses, small businesses, not just pubs, but businesses from across the spectrum. Their concerns about not only the rate revaluations, the vicious tax rises that they've now had to suffer, but also the effect of the cost of the Workers' Rights Bill. When can the 7,001 of us expect a reply?
Mr. Speaker, I am regularly replying to letters and parliamentary questions from the honourable member and members on all sides of this House.
Shadow Chancellor Sir Mel Stride.
Yeah. In Britain, we have a very specific way of destroying someone's career. We start by being incredibly polite. It is the political equivalent of saying, with all due respect, right before you tell someone their outfit is hideous. Rupert Lowe rose to his feet, wished the Speaker well, resisting what I can only assume was a burning desire to challenge him to a foot race down the corridors of power, and then dropped a statistical nuclear bomb. 7,000. That is the number of businesses, not just pubs, but the entire economic ecosystem, that have written to him expressing sheer terror. We are talking about business rates, soaring taxes, and worker rights that feel more like shackles to a struggling entrepreneur. Lowe didn't shout. He used that deceptively gentle tone that screams, "I am smiling, but this is going to hurt." His killer line? When can the 7,001st of us expect a reply? Now, in the real world, if you ignore 7,000 letters, you are considered rude. In Parliament, you call it ongoing correspondence. Dan Tomlinson was sent out to do the interpretive dance of a reply, essentially telling the House that replies are happening somewhere, perhaps in a magical Narnia where inboxes empty themselves. It was a classic move. Acknowledge the system. Ignore the actual human being asking for help. But the tone was set. The government was on the defensive, and the Common Sense Brigade was just getting started. If Rupert Lowe was the opening act, Mel Stride was the headliner who came to burn the theatre down. Mel Stride doesn't just ask questions, he constructs elaborate, polite, verbal traps, and then kindly invites the government to step inside them. He began with the traditional wishing the speaker well, which in Westminster speak is the universal signal to brace for impact. Stride zeroed in on the latest business rates U-turn. There is nothing that screams, "We have a plan," quite like announcing a policy change that has already been leaked to half of Fleet Street before the Chancellor has even finished her morning tea. He tapped the metaphorical answer sheet with the calm authority of a man who has not only done the homework, but has already graded yours and found it lacking. Then came the foghorn of a question. Why, if pubs are on their knees, did the Chancellor choose to spend billions elsewhere instead of providing proper permanent support? It wasn't just an accusation, it was a just asking that comes with 20 pages of footnotes and a bibliography. The air in the chamber turned cold. You could almost see the Treasury team scrambling for their inherited mess flashcards.
Mr. Speaker, when the Right Honourable Gentleman was in government, 7,000 pubs closed under the previous government. We have permanently lowered the tax rate that retail, hospitality and leisure pay. And when I became Chancellor of the Exchequer, we faced a situation where all of the COVID support was going to disappear overnight. We've put £4.3 billion of taxpayers' money into supporting our retail and hospitality sector, including pubs. But we recognise the distinct problems that pubs face, which is why, unlike the previous Conservative government, we are setting out more support.
Mel.
Mr. Speaker, they just don't get it. And of course, it's not just pubs, Mr. Speaker, it's the whole of the high street that is seeing massive increases, some of well over 100%. Shops, restaurants, hotels. Where is the help for them?
Rachel Reeves responded with what can only be described as a greatest hits compilation of Treasury excuses. When you are in government and things are going south, you have a very specific playlist. Track 1. We inherited a mess. Track 2. COVID support was vanishing. Track 3. The previous lot were worse. She leaned into the dispatch box, deploying the figure of £4.3 billion like a fiscal comfort blanket. She insisted that pubs are special and have distinct problems. It was technically a lot of words, but emotionally, she was shouting, "Flinke, please look at my spreadsheet." She has this way of ending every sentence with the implication that if you don't like her plan, the alternative is basically the end of Western civilization as we know it. The parody here isn't that she's incompetent. It's that she is so relentlessly sensible that the chaos on the high street feels almost impolite to mention. While she talks about targeted support, a publican in the North is looking at an electricity bill that looks like a ransom note. Reeves is the head teacher explaining why the school roof is leaking while the students are currently swimming to their desks. Mel Stride, however, was not about to let her retreat into the safety of a rounding error. "They just don't get it," he declared, which is Commons code for I am about to explain this very slowly so even a Labour frontbencher can understand. It isn't just about the pubs. It is the shops, the restaurants, the hotels, the entire DNA of the British High Street. He pointed out rate increases of over 100%. 100%! That isn't a tax increase. That is an eviction notice. Reeves countered by deploying the word reality, which is always a red flag that a politician feels reality is currently being very inconvenient to their narrative. She talked about tapering support and affordability. Then came the line that every chancellor eventually has to say when they've run out of other people's money. Other taxpayers. It is a brilliant bit of rhetorical gymnastics, making the struggling cafe owner feel guilty for wanting to stay in business because it might cost someone else a few pennies. It was sensible. It was measured. And it was deeply unsatisfying in the way only a Treasury answer can be when you are staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. The debate then widened, because once you open the door marked economic anxiety, everyone wants to have a go. Richard Fuller brought up inflation and the despairing prospect of the OBR's latest projections. Why, he asked, does every single government policy add up to such a mountain of gloom? Enter Torsten Bell. Bell responded with a line so sharp it should have come with a trigger warning for the opposition benches. "Leading with your chin," he said, which is parliamentary for, "You have just walked into a punch." He insisted that living standards are rising and that they are fixing the mess day after day after day. It was confident, it was punchy, and it was delivered with the energy of someone who has memorized a graph and is daring you to find a flaw in the y-axis. But while Bell was busy being clever, the underlying theme remained. The government is essentially saying, things were terrible, now they are slightly less terrible, please clap. It is the political equivalent of being told your house is no longer on fire, but ignoring the fact that you no longer have a roof. The focus then shifted to the literal infrastructure of the country. Rebecca Smith raised the issue of storms, collapsed seawalls, and the total absence of an emergency reserve. It is never a good sign when a MP asks if there is a contingency fund, and the answer sounds like a shrug wrapped in a press release.
Mr. Speaker, persistently high inflation and fears that things will get tougher for their children are top issues for the British public. But the OBR's assessment of Labour's plans was, quote, growth in real household disposable income is projected to fall to around 0.25% per annum, well below the last decade's average. Minister, why is the sum of all this government's economic policies condemning the British public to such a despairing prospect?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is what is called leading with your chin. The MPs opposite were in power in the last Parliament, which saw living standards fall by 2.9%. They have already risen under this government by 1.5% because we are turning around their mess day after day after day.
James Murray took us on a reassuring tour of departmental budgets and robust plans. It was the fiscal equivalent of saying, "We've got this," while frantically checking the weather app. The message was clear. Expect the unexpected, plan accordingly, and please don't ask for any actual cash. It is a bold strategy to run a country on the hope for the best method, especially when the seawalls are currently in the sea. Just when you thought the tension couldn't get any higher, energy costs entered the room, dragging their massive bills behind them. Peter Bedford cited reports of ideology trumping economics and asked if anyone could please have a word with the Energy Secretary before the lights go out. Torsten Bell was back at the box, blaming gas dependence and suggesting that the opposition's desire to stay on gas forever belonged in cloud cuckoo land. It is a whimsical phrase, but in this context, it was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Marc Garnier then piled on with the cold, hard math. Energy bills up 10%, small businesses drowning, and a shiny alternative plan promising savings of £5,000 a year. Bell's counter? We are building infrastructure. We are avoiding inflation. We are fixing the inherited system. It is a circle of blame that never ends. Everyone agrees the bills are too high. Everyone agrees it is a disaster. But the government's solution seems to be a very expensive "I told you so." Finally, we came back to hospitality. In Britain, every economic argument eventually ends up in a pub. James Wilde pointed out that promises were made. Taxes were supposed to fall, but instead towns and villages are being hammered. "Does the Chancellor get it?" he asked. Dan Tomlinson's reply was a masterclass in gaslighting by percentages. He claimed the opposition's plan would have led to a 300% overnight increase, making Labour's crushing taxes look like a bargain. It's like a mugger saying, "You should be grateful they only took your wallet and not your shoes." He described the removal of pandemic relief as easing someone into a cold bath, instead of pushing them in. But here is the thing about a cold bath. Eventually, you still freeze. Daisy Cooper delivered the final, sigh wrapped in a spreadsheet question, pointing out that 3 to 5 year plans are being thrown into chaos. Tomlinson's response? Conversations will continue. Reform has begun. Online giants will pick up the tab. It was a symphony of maybe tomorrow, while the today is currently falling apart. Now, if you thought the business rates debate was the end of the line, you clearly haven't been paying attention to the ghost that haunts the Treasury corridors, national insurance. Rachel Reeves has a very peculiar relationship with this particular tax. She spent months promising that working people wouldn't see their taxes go up, only to pull a bait and switch that would make a used car salesman blush. The increase in employer national insurance contributions has been described as a tax on jobs, and in the House the humiliation reached fever pitch. Opposition members were practically lining up to ask how a pro-business government could possibly think that making it more expensive to hire people would somehow lead to economic growth. It is like trying to make a horse run faster by taking away its oats and adding a backpack full of lead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new report by the Prosperity Institute is highly critical of the government's net zero policies and its adverse impact on the broader economy. My constituents' fuel bills continue to soar because of the government's reluctance to use more traditional sources of fuel. Will the Minister commit to raising this with the Energy Secretary because such ideological-driven policies are having an adverse impact on my constituents' bills?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, energy bills are too high because the Tory party left us dependent on the roller coaster of gas prices. Wholesale gas prices today remain more than double what they were at the start of 2020. If the party opposite think that is some kind of advert for staying on gas forever, they're living in cloud cuckoo land.
Reeves' defense was, once again, the inherited black hole. She talks about this £22 billion gap as if it were a sentient creature that appeared in the night and ate the national budget. But as the session dragged on, the cracks started to show. You can only blame the ghost of the previous government for so long before people start noticing that you are the one holding the shovel. Every time she mentioned the black hole, the groans from the opposition benches grew louder. It is the political version of "the dog ate my homework," and frankly, the teacher isn't buying it anymore. One of the most devastating moments came when the discussion pivoted to public sector productivity, while the private sector, the pubs, the shops, the small tech firms, is being squeezed for every last drop of tax revenue. The public sector seems to be receiving a giant, unmonitored injection of cash. Rupert Lowe, with his characteristic sharp eye for a wasteful pound, pointed out that simply throwing money at a problem doesn't fix it if the system is broken. He asked the Chancellor why she was asking the High Street to fund inflation-busting pay rises in the public sector without any guarantee of improved service. It is a question that cuts to the very heart of the Labour ideology. To Reeves, spending is investment. To the man running a hardware store in Ipswich, spending is just money leaving his pocket to pay for a bureaucracy that makes his life harder. Reeves tried to pivot to modernization, but the word sounded hollow. When you have a massive increase in the number of civil servants, but a decrease in the efficiency of government departments, modernization looks a lot like bloat. The humiliation here wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the realization that the government's priorities are completely inverted. They are prioritizing the machinery of the state over the engine of the economy. Let's talk about the reality of being a small business owner in Britain right now. According to the government, you should be thrilled that they are investing in the NHS and fixing the foundations. But if you can't pay your staff or your rent because the business rate multiplier has gone through the roof, the foundations don't really matter, because you won't have a roof over your head. During the session, the phrase "small business survival kit" was thrown around sarcastically. The opposition pointed out that the government's idea of a kit is a tax hike, a minimum wage increase that many can't afford, and a pat on the back from a minister who has never had to balance a commercial ledger. It was a brutal takedown of the disconnected elite. Rupert Lowe, in particular, highlighted the irony of a party that claims to represent the working class actively destroying the small businesses that employ them. It is a logical knot that Reeves couldn't untangle. She kept returning to stability. But for a shop owner on the edge of collapse, stability looks a lot like stagnation. The gap between the Westminster bubble and the reality of the British High Street has never looked wider or more dangerous for a sitting Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and wishing you a speedy recovery. We know that pubs have been badly hit by these business rates changes, but it's businesses right across retail, hospitality and leisure that have made investment decisions and hiring decisions based on the expectation raised by this government that they would get a full 20p discount on their business rate multiplier. Mr. Speaker, it is these businesses, music venues, restaurants, soft play centres, hotels that are the high street shops that communities most love. Do ministers accept that anything less than the full 20p discount for retail, hospitality and leisure will leave the 3 to 5 year business plans of these high street businesses in total disarray?
Mr. Speaker, we announced a 5p reduction in the multiplier on top of the 7p or thereabouts reduction that was taking place as a result of the revaluation more broadly. And, Mr. Speaker, that's a £900 million transfer of underlying rates liability away from the smallest high street businesses towards the online giants and the largest properties. When the Liberal Democrats had the chance, when the Conservatives had the chance, they kept the tax rates the same. We have introduced significant reform. We started the work of that reform at the budget, and of course we will continue conversations in the months ahead.
As if the business community wasn't angry enough, the session took a sharp turn into the territory of the winter fuel payment. This has become the defining scandal of the early Starmer-Reeves era. The decision to means test this payment, essentially stripping it away from millions of pensioners who aren't rich but aren't quite poor enough to qualify for help, has been described as a moral failure. Mel Stride didn't miss a beat. He asked the Chancellor how she could look those pensioners in the eye while simultaneously finding billions of pounds for public sector pay deals. It was a guns versus butter argument for the 21st century. Reeves' response was clinical. She spoke about fiscal responsibility and targeting resources. But targeting resources is just a polite way of saying cutting support. The humiliation here was palpable. You could see the discomfort on the Labour backbenches. Many of them know that this decision is going to haunt them at the next election. It makes the government look cold, calculating, and, worst of all, unfair. When you are taking money from the elderly to pay for a black hole while giving inflation-busting raises to train drivers, the fairness narrative collapses into dust. We have to talk about the manifesto. Remember that. The document that promised no tax rises on working people. The opposition certainly remembered. They spent a good portion of the session reading Labour's own promises back to them, word for painful word. Every time a minister tries to argue that a national insurance hike on employers isn't a tax on working people, a logic fairy loses its wings. As Mel Stride pointed out, employers don't just grow money on trees in the Treasury garden. If you tax an employer, they either lower wages, stop hiring, or raise prices. All three of those things hit working people right in the wallet. Reeves's attempts to argue around this were increasingly desperate. She used the word direct a lot, as in, we didn't directly tax working people. It's the kind of legalistic hair-splitting that drives the British public insane. It makes the government look untrustworthy. It makes them look like they are trying to trick the public with definitions rather than lead them with honesty. The humiliation was in the exposure of the hidden taxes that are slowly strangling the economy. Rachel Reeves sat at the center of this storm, a chancellor who genuinely seems to believe that as long as the numbers on her screen add up, the pain in the real world is just a statistical anomaly. This wasn't a session of Parliament. It was a slow-motion car crash of economic theory hitting the brick wall of reality. The questions were sharp, the answers were smooth, and the result was a nation left waiting for a taper that might never come. Parliament at its most honest is often its most frustrating. We saw the gap between policy language and lived experience. We saw a government that is so relentlessly sensible it has become blind to the desperation of the high street. Rachel Reeves survived the session. The spreadsheets remain intact, but the pubs and shops of Britain are still waiting for someone to actually answer the letter. Thank you for watching,